Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is set to deliver the 6th administration's final budget tomorrow. A stagnant economy, a ballooning wage bill and a struggling tax base have all been some of the considerations of Treasury, surely. Let's discuss this balancing act that Godongwana will surely have to do. We're joined this afternoon by Thokozile Madonko, who is with the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at Wits University, and Zimbali Mncube, who is a researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice. To both of our guests, thanks very much indeed for coming on. Thokozile, I want to kick off the discussion with you because it really is a massive task that the minister has tomorrow. I feel like we've been saying this for some time. We went through COVID-19 when we talked about this delicate balancing act that the minister will have to do. It is even more true this year, and perhaps particularly because it is an election year. Thokozile, are you still there?
That's true, Michelle. Yeah. Yes, I am. Sorry. That's true, Michelle. It is a delicate balancing act, and I think it's a delicate balancing act for the 18.2 million South Africans that live on less than 38 rand a day. And it's a delicate balancing act for all those that are dependent on the grant system to be able to provide their basic needs. And so often the focus is on investment, but we need to think about investment in people, in South Africans.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a delicate balancing act for the 7.9 million people in our country who are unemployed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the question here is, are we following a fiscal policy, a budget policy that is geared towards dealing with unemployment? And our research is showing that this is not the case. We've been pursuing a policy since around 2012. Some would say we could date it back to GEAR, but let's look at 2012, and from there onwards, we've seen, a halt in growth, a lack of investment in capital investment, both by the private sector and the public sector. And this then means that we're not pursuing a growth strategy that involves jobs, real jobs on the ground, that enables people to put food on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. The Social Relief of Distress grant, we know Zimbali will likely continue. That announcement was made, I believe it was until March 2025. In the medium-term budget, that announcement was made that it would continue until March 2025. So the minister, unlikely tomorrow to go back on it. But of course, the question always is, when we talk about this delicate balancing act, where will the money come from in a context where we have this infrastructure spend deficit, we've got this wage bill that is just ballooning, and of course we've got this budget deficit that is just almost out of control? How do you reckon the minister is going to try and make his way around that?
Thanks, Michelle. I think we've seen in the MTBPS, the National Treasury signaling that there will be more cuts on the way. And so realistically, we're expecting that there will be more cuts. But the question to ask is, why should these cuts be burdening the poor, which Togo spoke about? Why should this burden fall on those that cannot find employment for themselves, on those that rely on public services, for instance? And I think it's unfortunate that the government has failed the majority of South Africans in raising the maximum available resources to guarantee these rights. And to your question, so we've done a bit of research as well, and we've shown that it shouldn't be the case that we don't have any choice but to cut expenditure when there are idle sums of money that are available, which accrue to the wealthy through, for instance, retirement fund benefits, through which, for those that are earning more than 750,000, these amount to about 65 billion. When you look at, for instance, ineffective incentives to businesses, such as the employment tax incentive, the government can use that and draw on about 7 billion, which up to so far we are not sure what is the impact of this incentive in generating employment, when you've already touched on in your inset that unemployment has increased once again this year. We're also saying there's the gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve account, which the IJ and many others who have joined in the debate have shown that it serves as potential for the government to draw down on just a portion of these funds, not exhaust all of them, but just a portion, to ensure that, for instance, we can support those that are unemployed and those that are still receiving the inadequate SRD grant, which has been 350 since 2020, whilst the food poverty line is somewhere around 780.
Yeah, and that is the question, isn't it, Thokozile? The issue around the social relief of distress grant and our continued stance of shying away from a basic income grant, which activists are obviously pushing for.
Michelle, I just wanted to take us back a little bit about this myth about a ballooning public wage bill. This is not the case. These are jobs. These are good jobs, public jobs that provide a public service. And in fact, our research has shown that over the last little while, we've actually brought the public wage bill down, and the medium-term budget policy statement tabled last year in fact indicated a further cut to the public sector wage bill, which just a back-of-the-hand envelope calculation that we did is talking about 40,000 public sector jobs in the next 2 years. In a context where we are a developmental state that needs a public sector to develop our neighborhoods, our communities, to be able to fix our roads, our water, our infrastructure. So, first of all, we don't have a ballooning public sector wage bill. We have an underfunded public sector that needs everybody on the ground working to make South Africa better for all. The second thing about a universal basic income grant.
Before you continue, our public sector, our public sector's one of the highest paid in the world, though. You're saying that there isn't a ballooning public sector wage bill, but with an economy like ours, how can we be ranked so highly in so much as how much we pay our public sector?
So you have to look at, stats. There's lies, and then there's statistics. You have to be very careful about how you use the statistics. And one of the things around South Africa's need is, given the legacy of apartheid, we have to talk about the underfunding and underdevelopment of many neighborhoods and communities across the country. And also, what does it take? What is the number per 100,000 public sector do we need?
But it's a third of total government expenditure.
To look at the gross inequality level. So we have a very low paid private.
All right, we do apologize. There seems to be a bit of a disconnect between me and one of our guests, Thokozile Madonko, who is with the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at Wits University. Thokozile, I'm sorry about that. There is a bit of a lag between you and I insofar as our internet connection is concerned. Let's go through those numbers again, because, the question that I sort of interjected was that our public sector wage bill does account for a third of government expenditure. You were saying let's be careful of how we use those numbers.
Absolutely. That's a third of jobs. That is people working. Those are people paying taxes. Those are people delivering services. So it's very easy for us to attack that as if it's an expense. But in fact, it's an investment in people, in jobs, in employment, in a country with one of the highest inequality rates in the world. And so what we need, given our legacy, given the background of desperate need in this country for services, for electricity, for water, for functional roads, is that we need people in the public sector delivering services. For those who have to queue at clinics, they understand what it means not to have enough nurses. For those at schools that are overcrowded, they understand what it means to not have enough teachers. So when we attack the public sector, we're attacking employment. We're attacking, people who provide for their families, but also provide to the fiscus. They pay their tax. So it's very critical for us to think of the public wage bill, that third that we're talking about, as being an investment in our country, an investment in our people, and an investment in our future, which is absolutely critical. And I wanted to just mention around the universal basic income grant, we have to begin talking about it in the context of the climate crisis. And it's both an investment in creating demand in the economy. Because remember, demand, when we use these fancy economic terms, we just mean rands and cents in the back of someone's pocket, being able to engage in economic activity. And at the moment, we don't have enough people who have rands and cents in their pockets to be able to engage in economic activity. And so a universal basic income grant can both serve as that mechanism for driving change in the economy, but can also recognize that the nature of work, the nature of our environment is such that we need to support people by virtue of being people in a country, living and being and existing. And a universal basic income grant can provide both of those kind of sort of safety nets that both enables people, as we saw under COVID, the minute they lost their jobs, they lost their income. And we want to be able to say, by virtue of being living and working in South Africa, and you can get a basic income that no matter what crisis hits you, if it's a flood, yes, tomorrow, or a drought the next day, or another pandemic, you are covered because we know you're in the system, and we can give you that monthly amount that you deserve, because we know that you can be an economic agent in this society.
Yeah. Zimbali, do you want to weigh in on those two issues, and perhaps specifically on the basic income grant?
Yeah, no, I think I agree very much with Togo, especially on the issue around the public sector wage bill and the attack on really public employment. I think we also need to look at it in terms of its gendered impact, because we know that the face of unemployment in South Africa, when you look at the recent stat, is black women. And most of them are employed in the public sector as frontline workers in nursing and so on. And so by freezing posts or not filling vacant posts, you are also exacerbating the unemployment of women in the country. And it also puts added pressure on the unpaid care work that is undertaken by women in this household, because public services are then failing to fill in that gap. And then we need to raise a question about if women are undertaking most of their time doing care and child care work, where will they find time to get employment? And so that's a good question to raise, and the impact that these budget cuts are having on the most marginalized in our country. And I think it's important to also reflect on the question of where the money is going to come from. The question of the wealth tax, for instance, is one issue that hasn't been raised in the recent policy debate, nor in the budget, yet we year in, year out, see the cuts being done to public services, healthcare, education, and so on. And so I think it's time that the debate around, or rather measures to introduce a wealth tax in the medium term are considered alongside these immediate measures, which I've also mentioned, of removing tax breaks for the wealthy in particular, of looking at ineffective incentives such as the recent reduction of corporate income tax. How much are we actually losing in giving money to the wealthy and corporates instead of channeling it to services that could enhance human development capabilities and ensure that people are healthy and skilled to participate in the economy?
And perhaps to answer the question, Thokozile, of where the money will come from, we're talking about a ballooning public sector wage bill. Perhaps we should talk about the ballooning cabinet. Again,
that's a drop in the ocean, the ballooning cabinet. I mean, from a sense of efficiency and, slimming things down, yes, we could look and see what the expense is. But we're talking about trillions of rands here. And so the big ticket items is the cost of our debt, for example. We pay some of the highest interest rates in the world on our debt. And that is something that is just unacceptable for a developing country like ourselves. We should be looking at and calling for a review of the nature and form of our debt structuring. Because it is very, very expensive, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
We are from the global south, and most of our resources are now flowing to the global north, because where there's a debt, there's a credit. And those creditors, those rentiers, as they're often spoken about, are the ones that are really cashing in on Eskom, on Transnet, on all of our big ticket items, SAA, for example. So we need to look at the big money. And I mean, it's, often people say that a government budget is like a household budget. It's not. It's completely different. And so, yes, at a household level, you can think about cutting back on luxury goods if you're lucky enough to have them. But at a state level, at a government level, we can think about some really major questions about should we even be paying some of the debt on Eskom. Some have argued that it's
all right. Apologies. Again, we have a bit of a touch and go connection with you, Thokozile. Sorry for coming in here. Zimbali, just your last comments on, given what Thoko has just talked about insofar as just how much we pay for our debt, perhaps not a good time now to be talking NHI in this context. Growth forecast of 1%, maybe 1.5%, unemployment going up. Not a good time now for the money that we'll have to find for NHI, if indeed it does happen.
Yeah, I think those are important points, especially around the issue of debt. What we'll hear tomorrow is likely that we are nearing a debt crisis. But I think what is important to also consider in that debate is that there are measures that the government can take in reducing the cost of its debt, such as yield curve adjustment and ensuring that we are borrowing short-term debt as opposed to long-term, which has proven to be more expensive, and using some of our domestic resources, such as in the PIC, which many researchers have shown can be useful to support some of our priorities, and in surplus by over 1.2 trillion rands. And so I think coming back to the NHI issue, these are issues we should consider. Where is the money going to come from? But also, what is the current state of our public services, and what capacity do they have in absorbing a larger pool of people into the healthcare sector, for instance. And so it speaks to what are we doing now in terms of the macroeconomic framework that is either failing our current healthcare system or strengthening it, so such that when the time comes for an expanded and universal healthcare system, which is an ideal and a commendable thing to do, but it needs to be done in a context whereby our macroeconomic framework is also supporting and capacitating our different public services, especially healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. Big job ahead for the Finance Minister tomorrow. To both of our guests, thanks so much for joining us here on Daytime Update. Thokozile Madonko is a researcher at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at Wits University, and Zimbali Mncube with the Institute for Economic Justice. It's great to talk to both of you. 1:52, you're right on time for a sense of what's to come on Newsfeed PM. Stephen Cruz is in studio with us. Stephen, great to see you.
Michelle, afternoon. Ready for tomorrow?
Almost.